Hello, I'm Yonggu Bae, the curator of Hi-Fi Immersion YouTube channel, and we're at Sorry Shop with Mr. Matt Klifoth, the CEO and the owner at Audiovector today. We are here to talk about the company story and their new flagship, R10 Arrêtez.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today.
When did you get here?
I came in yesterday. So yesterday around noon, I was so privileged to be picked up by lovely Mira, from which I've known for almost 7 years now. We've been doing business for 6 of them. She took me to the hotel and told me there was no other plans for yesterday, which was okay because it was a 15-hour flight. So that was fine. Yeah, so I had a walk in beautiful Gangnam.
When was the last time you've been to Korea then?
2022, I believe it was.
Right after the COVID,
The second we could travel, I went out again. Actually, before COVID, they announced whilst I was in Vietnam that people had to go back now. So I was probably the last one back and the first one out.
If you had to describe Audiovector in 2 words, what would that be?
It's a strong DNA. We're a conservative company based on very important and also few principles, and we don't back down from those. So strong DNA would be the 2 terms I would use because that's what we practice every day.
What's the most misunderstood thing people assume about Danish sound or Scandinavian speaker design?
I'm not sure, but it could be that it's a light sound because most Scandinavian companies uses smaller drivers and more of them to create more even distribution and a more punchy deliverance, where US loudspeakers have more bigger bass drivers, bigger drivers, and it gets just a different sound signature. But it does not have to be light or pointy because it's smaller drivers. It can be very, very, very well performing, just like the Porsche 911 6-cylinder. But it's very rare that I hear anything negative about Danish loudspeaker craft because we've been in the business for so many years and we have a lot of great companies coming from Denmark. So where Audiovector differs is that we run our own operation, we run our own development team, we are privately owned, privately funded, and that's rare these days, where capital funds take over and makes everything more commercial. And that's by all means fair and okay for me, but I prefer to stay old school and traditional. We only produce passive speakers. We do have an active subwoofer because that's needed, but we don't produce active loudspeakers. We work only in the passive area because that's where we're best.
What's your personal go-to test track when you need to know in 30 seconds if a speaker is right?
Man in the Long Black Coat by Bob Dylan, because it has a significant guitar play, and when Bob Dylan sings or shouts or whatever you want to call it, I know exactly how that's supposed to sound. That experience comes from I was 6, 7, 8 years old, and my father showed me Bob Dylan for the first time. Girl from the North Country, I know exactly how that rhythm is supposed to be reproduced in a loudspeaker as well.
What part of the speaker design still surprises you after all these years when you hear the result in a room?
The small changes. It's no secret that we have a team run by my father and another engineer. That is our development. I'm not technical in that sense. I understand many things, but deeply technical I've never been. But what surprises me is that if you change your voice coil constructions from aluminum to titanium in a mid-range driver, you'll have a new driver. If you ground the chassis in your loudspeaker, you'll get a background with less noise that you could ever imagine. If you etch a foil in your AMT differently, you have a new sounding. The things that you can't really measure but makes a difference, that always surprises me.
Growing up in a family loudspeakers business, what did you learn about sound before you learned the words for it?
I learned music. I didn't learn about sound until I was much older. My sister and I, we were taught to listen to music. So my father would be on the floor with a crossover and condensators and resistors everywhere. But he would say, how does that make you feel? Do you think there's a presence in the room? Do you have goosebumps? What do you like? So what he taught us how to listen to real music, how to understand when Satriani plays, how to understand when Netrebko sings, and just the perceivement of what music is. Music is not only high-end. High-end helps the music, but music is a feeling. So if you get the right feeling from listening to music, the sound is right. And that which comes to the next step. How to tweak your system, how to tweak your loudspeaker, how to develop this and that to get to that point.
Did you go to live concert a lot at your youth?
still, but I only go small places. So when I was a young boy, my father would take me once a month. My first real experience that I can remember was a B.B. King concert in Copenhagen. I was a very small boy because I was on the shoulders of my father. And B.B. King handed me his placard and he gave me like a necklace. It was an accessory, cheap something, but it was from the king himself, which I said to my dad, Dad, it's from the king himself. So those experiences, you can't pay money for a system to get that. But when you understand these experiences, it's easier to go pay for a hi-fi system that suits you. So I would encourage everybody to go to as many concerts as possible. Choose the small places. Choose the dark basement. Choose not the big stadiums, because the sound can't compete with smaller jazz clubs.
Do you remember the first time you heard a system and thought, okay, this is high-end? What was the moment?
That was a pair of Audiovectors on a Griffon amp 25 years ago. So that was, but you said high-end. My first feeling of this is really good stereo, that was a name system. On a 2.5-way Audiovector speaker when I was very small. My father was the name importer for 20 years in Denmark.
Right.
So, but that's where my foot instantly started like, wow, what's happening? What's happening? But that was not high end. That was just a rhythm. High end was with Griffon, which I've followed ever since. So I've had pretty much every amp they ever made and have used it to develop R10 and R8.
So have you used Apex and Commander?
I own the Apex and Commander. Yeah, I used to own the Mephisto and the smaller Pre. I don't remember the name. I have a 333 as well, a 300, a Pre-Diablo as well, a 120.
When did you realize you weren't just around the company, but that you wanted to lead it?
Well, I was in another job, and a very good one. I always wanted to join the company. Sometimes a father and son dynamic, don't really know where each other are. And I wasn't sure where my father was, there was a few years where I didn't know if he wanted to continue the company, if he wanted to pass it on to me, if he wanted to get another partner. I wasn't sure. But one day he came to me and I said to him actually, could you give me a small loan? Because I would like to open up one more real estate shop. I was very young and I had one shop and it was going well. And he looked at me and said, I'll lend you the money, but don't you want to loan the money to take over the company? Yeah. And I started crying now. And I said, absolutely. So I sold my small shop. It was a small share, a franchise thing. So I sold that to another guy. And 3 months after, I was in the company. Back then, it had a big market in Denmark and a big market in Russia, 160 shops in Russia. But that changed now. And we were 19 export countries. And now we're nearly 60.
So how did the war change your business?
Before Ukraine and Russia had a very big financial crisis, and that's what changed most of it. They changed from high-end hi-fi and mid-end hi-fi to box speakers, basically. But that was okay because it was a sleeping pillow for us. So what changed was I packed a suitcase and I traveled 150 days a year, visiting clients and distributors around the world. And suddenly my father had more energy to also think of new projects and dream up new concepts, work on new parts and so on. So it was a very giving period. Yeah, very giving period where kind of the company restarted a little bit with a regained energy.